You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I graduated in 2000 with an excellent degree. I'd even done my year away in Ivy League college in America. There was a lot of people that did a lot of advocacy, lobbying, and capacity building to make sure that venues accepted us. And we also made sure we created really good relationships and found allies in the media and in institutions. We're so close in terms of just having our own solid, without apology, film industries, pushing out content for everyone to enjoy, but absolutely from an African point of view.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest, Yemisi Mokuolu, who is an award-winning and highly regarded independent producer and creative industries business consultant, and also founder and CEO of Hatch Ideas Worldwide. Welcome to the podcast, Yemisi. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm good.
How's your day so far?
It's great. Today has been a nice admin-y day. I've been just kind of like filing things and just getting ready. I've got a couple of workshops that I'm doing next week, so I'm just preparing those. And so it's been quite a nice day to be able to just be at my desk and just design some workshops that I'll be delivering.
Brilliant. The life of an entrepreneur. So, I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Yemisi.
Yes, so I'm Yemisi Mokuolu, and I'm the founder, as you said, and CEO of Hatch Ideas, where I provide business development and project development support to creative, cultural and social entrepreneurs, and also organizations and innovators, so that they can develop their cultural change and social impact projects and businesses. And so, they can have a real structure, they can make them sustainable. And I do that by providing one-to-ones, training workshops, and kind of like foundational business development. So kind of like, how can you develop your business model? What is your business offer? And how can you manage your team? But a lot of the work I do specialize in supporting people, their fundraising, which we'll talk about much more. But I started off my journey actually when I graduated from university. Basically, I struggled to get any kind of employment. I graduated in 2000 with an excellent degree. I'd even been to an Ivy League, done my year away in Ivy League college in America, and came back to the UK and just absolutely struggled to get work. My friends sat me down and said to me, look, Yemisi, at the end of the day, the environment is going to discriminate against you. And so I wasn't able to get those graduate positions. There weren't really any Black people at that time that were eligible. You'd kind of like be immediately dismissed. So I had dreams and I had my own aspirations and those things I wanted to do. You can imagine I was quite young, so I really couldn't understand the fact that people could discriminate this blatantly against someone. And it sounds like a funny departure and thing to do, but it really occurred to me that what was going on in people's minds was the fact that they had devalued me because I was African. Some of them absolutely hated me because I was African, but there were a lot of people who could not comprehend that someone of African origin or heritage could be capable. And so I decided to set up these African drum and bass nights because I wanted to showcase myself and my culture and the things that I joined through the values that I saw them as, which were high class values. For me at the time, Africa was really innovating in terms of music, really pioneering in terms of drum and bass. And this is like 2001 and 2. This is way before Afrobeats. This is when Kwaito and, even Amapiano and all of that lot was really moving at that time in all the clubs across Africa and actually in New York. It just wasn't popping in the UK. So anyway, I started out of Africa. And that became wildly popular. And it'd be hosted once a month, would have like 300 to 400 people. At one point, we had a night where we actually had 800 people pass through the door, which was just phenomenal. And it just sent a message to me that, do you know what? Forget what everyone is saying. People want this. They are proudly African. And then there's loads of people there that have real interest and respect for African culture and interest and want to see something more than the sort of two-dimensional patronizing programming that we've been subjected to in the UK. And so I set up my business, Hatch Events, in order to be able to put together a festival to take the club night from being a club night to being a festival. And I was able to host one of the largest African street festivals, I would say, to that time in London, but I think potentially in the UK. It was the first kind of like truly modern African street festival. And that was hosted over 8 days in Carnaby. In Carnaby Street and Kingley Court. And we had about 200 performers. And for me, I curated every event. So, you know, there was classic African nights, there was sort of like contemporary, there was art programs, there was salons, because it was really important to have discussions about African culture, art, creativity. We had fabulous spoken word artists and actually visual artists as well. Kingley Court generously gave us a whole corner shop unit where we could have the salon. And then the truth is, I wanted to create a platform that really positioned African culture in the mainstream, because that's where it should be. We're not ghettoized. I don't ghettoize myself. You should be positioned in a place that you are at, not where people want to bring you down sort of thing, because they feel like it's their decision to make. Anyway, I was able to get BBC London to be the media sponsor, and they came down and they filmed 4 of the 8 days, loads of interviews, loads of pickup shots. I mean, they were over it in terms of the TV and the radio. We had slots on BBC London news segments, and then Choice FM came along and picked up on it, and The Guardian and The Time Out. And it just became a message to say, this is how African culture should and can be presented. And actually, D'banj was discovered at the event, and so were quite a number of other artists. And a lot of creatives realized their potential by featuring at the festival. And, you know, I know I'm talking and not giving you much space, but the thing for me was that I would tell the story because I didn't, in my wildest imagination, think that the festival could achieve this kind of level of impact. I can't remember whether she was Eritrean or Ethiopian, but she came to me and she said, never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine that I'd be sharing a joyous space with someone from Ethiopia, you know? And she was Eritrean, obviously, she's from Ethiopia. And it just, that for me was like, you know what? For better or for worse, I'm doing this for myself because I am proudly African. And thank goodness that it's the kind of space I've created that other people can actually come to peace and be at peace with themselves. So they can walk into any space. Do you see what I mean?
Brilliant, brilliant. So, I mean, you've detailed your struggles of trying to enter the creative industry, and you took your destiny into your own hands.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for over 20 years now.
Yes.
So when you started, Africa's creative and cultural industries weren't really getting much attention. So what did you see then that other people were potentially missing?
Well, I was born in Nigeria, and I was born in 77, kind of like a decade after the Biafra War. So sort of where Nigeria had been kind of like undone, decimated, and was trying to rebuild itself. So I was very, very close to the strong creativity from Nigeria, like having King Sunny Ade was like the biggest musician, Ebenezer Obey, looking at all the way that my family and everyone dressed, the designers, the fabric, even the painting, the sculptures, you know, so much creativity, but kind of like had cobwebs on it. And because this is a nation that had been struggling through a war, a lot of sculptures had to be put underground. You know, people were focusing focusing on surviving, really. And so I was shocked when I came to the UK and the way in which people were curating my culture. I was like, that's not Nigeria.
Very
We're a
true.
really sophisticated culture. Do you know what I mean? Like, I knew about Wole Soyinka, I knew about Fela Kuti, I knew about the Benin Bronzes. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then there's these people who are kind of like, one have completely erased it. And then what they have presented is like a farce. It makes me feel sick, actually. Just we'd been reduced to grass skirts and bones in our noses. Do you know what I mean? And then Bob Geldof had the audacity to make out that the whole of the continent of Africa was this famine, devoid of like self-determination and devoid of culture, and a bunch of like Europeans had to sing a song, you know, because we couldn't even come up with our own kind of like narrative ourselves. Do you know what I mean? And so I was open-mouthed. I was shocked. I was just looking around, are you kidding me? And then I would try to educate my friends around me about all the innovators and people across, and then they would actually tell me to my face that I was lying, that it's not true because it's not in the books. And so it took a while for me to stop saying, no, it is true. And then I realized, oh, okay, there needs to be another way. And so I applied to go to university. And in my university application, I wrote, how dare you call this the history of art when you've completely omitted a whole continent and they've only got one Black artist listed. I was like, accept me into your institution and tell me why you think you can call this the history of art. And so it was like, obviously I got into every university, because the truth is, it's kind of like, people in those positions, they're not scared of being challenged at the end of the day. But it was just such a disgusting oversight. And I didn't know how to repair it. The thing I thought I could do is if I could at least learn why they felt that they could position global culture in that way without Black people in it. Come on, tell me why. And then I also did journalism as well, so that I could have a way of being able to articulate truth, basically. You know, I didn't at that point know I was going to use festivals and live events as the gateway or the medium, but I just knew that African culture was being diminished and erased, and it was there. It was existing. It's always been there. Yes. I mean, look at the Egyptians, everything, you know, look at the wonderful traditions in Kenya and South Africa and the music, and it's all there. The whole continent is creativity. Yeah. And so I wanted to find my own voice. Yeah. And so I went to university in order to be able to kind of like figure out what that would be. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were immersed in early African culture, and also the need to almost rewrite the Western narrative on Africa. So since then, things have come a long way. Are you surprised by what Africa's creative and cultural industries have achieved so far?
No, because I had that in my mind, I started to obviously link with other people who had it in their mind. And part of the events that I did in the early 2000s was to activate people who already had it in them. Yeah. I'm a very collaborative person. So I would have meetings, so we'd gather together in parks, would gather together in studios. So BBC London became an incredible partner. And so I'd get artists and speakers and get them slots on BBC London. You know, people like DJ Abbas and others would lobby with venues in London who traditionally wouldn't allow Africans to programme. And so I would financially back it. For instance, things like the Indigo O2, they wouldn't give African promoters any kind of compensation. You'd have to pay the full thing. You couldn't negotiate. Yes. So I'd put down the $8,000. Do you see what I mean? Yes. You know, because I was getting loads of respect within the community. Do you know what I mean? People would trust. If Yemisi is doing something, we can trust that it will happen. Yeah. So I made sure that I was a really, really, really trustworthy business. And I would have to go to the councils, I'd have the Southwark Council, you know, Hackney, all of these people that were gatekeepers and didn't have any belief in our programming. You know, I remember going to the South Bank Centre and wanting to do the festival there. So you can imagine, we've done the Carnaby Festival, so that's already made people think, oh, actually, these Africans can do stuff, you know what I mean? And people didn't believe it. And so I'd have to go and really kind of like be there. try to get the Africa Center to send out good messages. And then that's why I changed to doing business development, because I realized, well, even I realized that's not true. So what happened was a group of musicians under the title, they were called the Master Drummers of Africa at the time. And they said to me, you've got a good way of being able to deliver projects successfully. Can you teach us how to? And I was like, of course. And so they would meet me in the park and I would teach them project planning and fundraising and sponsorship development. And then this amazing lady called Famida Begum came up to me and said, you know what, you can actually get paid to do this as a job. And I was like, I can. And so I know. So I went for a job interview and I got it. And I ended up being the coordinator of a program to build the capacity of community-led festivals in London in preparation for the 2012 Olympics, because they were doing this kind of cultural Olympiad around it. That was great. So I was able to train people like Carnival de Pueblo and Bashaki Mela and all these other sort of groups. I guess what I'm rambling about is the fact that I'm not surprised, because there was a lot of people, myself included, that did a lot of advocacy, lobbying and capacity building to make sure that venues accepted us, to make sure that we as producers knew what to do. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And we also made sure we created really good relationships and found allies in the media, yeah, and in institutions, so that now today, what you've got is an incredible framework, basically. It's the only way it could have happened. That has meant that we can have Burna Boy. Do you see what I mean? There's no way we could have had Burna Boy if it wasn't for the fact that a lot of people had worked hard to convince the O2 that Africans were of quality and were credible.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you mentioned in terms of lobbying councils, venues to allow African musicians and events to take part.
Yes.
So when you see the likes of Burna Boy and Wizkid performing at sold-out O2 events, what feeling does that give you?
I'm desperate to know that there's going to be a trickle down. So the reason I hesitate, I love it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's absolutely incredible. But for me, it's more a case of how do we generate wealth as opposed to individual wealth, but actual group wealth. And I know that these individuals are absolutely getting themselves in position so that they can help to build Africa's creative industries. So if anything, the truth of it is that I'm really impatient. I want it to happen now. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. It's great that they're filling out all these stadiums, but how are we building our own in Nigeria? How are we training our own sound and lighting and production guys? You know, we should have 200 musicians. To every Burna Boy, we should have 200 that can take their place. Do you know what I mean? You know, so I'm just champing at the bit to actually supercharge and accelerate, because all that creativity is there. It's just we need the infrastructure to have our own industry.
Yes. No, I totally agree. Obviously, there's the artist side, but there's also the operational and the infrastructure that has to be improved or become more robust underneath that.
Yes.
So with that in mind, what are your thoughts in terms of what needs to be done to improve the infrastructure for the creative industries in Africa in order for it to be sustainable and to achieve longevity?
Yeah. So I actually, about 3-4 years ago, co-wrote a book chapter called Financing Africa's Creative and Cultural Industries. And we spent 18 months talking to creatives, government organizations, investors, all the people that we identified as kind of like the stakeholders for that kind of sustainability. Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of stuff came out of it, but the most important thing that came out of it was that no one knew what the other one did.
Yes.
And no one knew how to work with the other. I was like, oh, so we've got to start from scratch. So really, my shortcut to that is that I'm currently working towards developing financing. So we need diverse financing that can be invested in creative and cultural businesses, individuals, and initiatives. Yeah. So what does that look like? Right now, if you are a creative anywhere in the Africa supply chain, so anywhere based in the world, and you're doing anything of creative content, where do you get to train? How do you get money to actually train? There's no grants for you. There's no bursaries, If you then manage to get that self together, how do you pay for studio time? Are there even any studios? So who's paying for that? Who's investing in actually building the studios? And then also being able to train the managers and the producers. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So it's kind of like, I think the people can do it. I just came back from Abu Dhabi, one of the investment conferences, and I talked about developing micro investors. So I don't know if people will know this. So I think it was in the 60s in Nigeria. What happened was that Guinness breweries either wanted to establish or grow. So what they did was they went to all the university students in Nigeria and asked them to buy shares in Guinness breweries.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So my mum was one of them, and she said it was so cool. We'd have these parties where we'd be like buying shares, like, and that's how these businesses were built. Okay. And my mum said she completely forgot. And then Guinness did a newspaper piece trying to find all of these people that invested so they could get their dividends, so they could get their return,
Oh, wow.
And yes, exactly. And my sister just happened to be reading it and saw my mum's name. And my mum got her dividends. Can you imagine? Like 30 years later. And I think she went on a cruise. So I want us to adopt that model because it is our model and it is a model that works. And so, if we can get some 20 to 40-year-olds or even older with a long-term view, because, we've got these equity crowdfunding platforms now.
Yes.
So you can actually put in a little bit of money and you'll be able to get like 0.something% of a share. But we're investing in ourselves and we're not sitting there waiting for these big venture capital firms to actually decide that we're of value and invest in us. We can invest in ourselves. So that's what I'm working on. And the other side of it is we've got so many credible businesses. That's why I started the business development arm. So I've got Hatch Ideas and Hatch Africa. And part of setting up Hatch Africa was so that people could have something that they could believe in that would actually work, that they could invest in. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So now that's done, there are so many creative businesses out there that are a sure thing. Do you see what I mean? And so I guess it's a kind of answer to your question is that what we need to do is invest in the building of our own infrastructure.
Fantastic. So you mentioned there you recently co-authored the book Finance for Creative and Cultural Industries in Africa. So if we can just go into a bit more detail regarding that.
Oh my gosh.
What were some of the key themes of the book?
Gosh, if I can remember. Like I said before, the main observation was that creatives don't know anything about investment. Investors don't know anything about creativity. Yeah. And then the intermediaries, like the development agencies, don't know anything about either. So what investors don't realize is that the creative industries does have investment models. So for instance, musicals, they actually have an investment model. And so you can back a play or a musical and there's a way to get your money back. There's also a percentage of investment that writers will automatically get as an industry agreement. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So these things need to be taught. It's about educating, but I've realized that it's more than educating. It's actually getting the investors to care. Because the truth is, they just like to do the work that they're doing anyway. They're not brave. They're not risk takers. They're not interested. They're not innovative. Yeah. So my conclusion, I know it sounds mean, but my conclusion is to just bypass that community altogether and then actually start to develop us as individuals, as micro investors. One of the other things that came out was that space. So space to create, time to create. Creatives, the mindset of a creator. Like I was saying, where are the recording studios? Where are the places where people can make? We have a lot of seamstresses. We've got a lot of people that are artisans, yeah?
Yes.
And I think that is our gold, to be quite honest. Being able to create working studios like we used to have. So Benin, right? The Benin bronzes. Kid, you have to imagine that there would have been like 400 studios and each of them would be filled with a master crafts person. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And then they would have had their apprentices. They would also have had someone who would be making the bronze. because the bronze is made from beeswax, the mold, you would have had people in north of Nigeria doing the honey for the beeswax, making that into product, getting that sent down to the east of Nigeria. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, so there's a very clear supply chain of, as you said, artisans and craftsmen or craftspeople.
Absolutely. Then you would have your salespeople, which is actually where a lot of my family sit, where you then take the bronzes or whatever it is, and then you go around and, you sell it. The Fulani are very well known for that. They still have all of the beautiful silver that they've been crafting, all of the carpets and all of the accessories that they weave. And then they go all around West Africa selling their goods.
Yes.
So I just feel that people not knowing our own means of production and our own supply chain. It's totally broken. No one knows. It still exists, but people aren't aware of it. And they're trying to adopt a Western kind of way of making and selling, which doesn't work. We should have a better understanding of how we actually make and sell and innovate on that. So that was one of the key things that just sadly lack of knowledge. We can't even progress to the next level, until we actually understand who we are and what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So you've detailed some of the most surprising or enlightening discoveries you made while researching the book and I guess some of the positive outcomes. So if we kind of touch on the challenges, in your opinion, what are some of the key challenges faced by Africa's creative and cultural industries? I know you've touched on some now, but if we can look at some of the other challenges faced and how do you believe we can overcome them?
Scaling. So Africa's popular. We're not in a position really anymore where people are saying that our culture and creativity is low class. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So we're good with that. Our music is heard everywhere. Fashion is now really starting. People are wanting to have an African designer in their books. Every agent. Our actors are taking over. In every corner of the planet, you'll find very successful African actors. So our value is high, but scaling is where we need to be focusing. And it just goes back to everything that I was saying, is like being able to have a method of how do I generate wealth as opposed to just having one individual person being rich. One of the people that I really like is Rihanna, where she's created loads of businesses, but everyone eats when she eats. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. She's created a strong brand, and off of the back of that, she's been able to create jobs. Yes?
Yes.
And so we need to get to a place whereby our brands are actually being able to create jobs, and our brands are working with each other so that we can create production lines and supply chains. Yes?
Yes. So I guess it goes back to your point in terms of creating an infrastructure and almost like an ecosystem.
100%.
Yeah, it's not just the person on the top who eats. Everyone else below has their part to play and also benefits through that success.
100%. We don't have the luxury to be in competition with each other. And to be quite honest, we don't need to be in competition because we haven't even scratched the surface of like our market potential,
I agree. So I guess if we haven't scratched the surface, how far do you think African music, creative industries can go?
That's why I'm saying I'm so excited, because it's like, okay, let's just do maths here. So you've got 1 billion people just on the continent, let alone in the diaspora.
Yes.
And then we can only name, 5 top artists? And that means that we've got 20 artists, are making a living from their creativity. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So say, for instance, you opened up an entertainment center in Nigeria, right? Like an O2. That means that you'd be able to employ, 800 people? Yes?
They're about, yes.
Yeah, for an O2 kind of thing. They're all being salaried, yes?
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So then they all start to become having disposable income. If you start to actually build manufacturing and you start to get a top designer and they actually are able to work with the seamstresses in the country to be able to make their goods and services, that means that they then have a salary. So it's kind of like ground up development. It's just being able to get brands to actually start to develop means of production in Africa. And that's where the micro investors come in, because they need money to be able to build those buildings and train the staff. So if we, as a community, even put in just a little bit of our own money, I'm talking about tiny amounts, all those tiny amounts make a lot. All it is that we can't be in competition with each other. We have to collaborate. I'm seeing so many amazing projects now where studios are being built, but they can't go any further because they haven't got enough of a network to support them either financially. Let me pull it back to the work that we're doing. So what we do is we create these incubator programs, right? And identify, say, 12 to 20 entrepreneurs, creative, cultural, and social entrepreneurs, yes? And we can support them. Of those, at least 5 end up becoming sustainable businesses, which means that they're still in business after 5 years. One example is Adire Lounge. She's now got an online platform where she sells fabrics and textiles that are made by women in Abeokuta in Nigeria. They design and they make those materials. They're then sold into department stores and massive fabric shops across Europe. That's only one, okay? That's helping to support a small community. We can replicate that model far more than we're doing now.
You've touched on how, I guess, sustainable impact can be made in Africa's creative industry and given an example of a company that you're working with. So I guess if we go into that a bit deeper in terms of what impact do you hope to achieve through the work of Hatch Ideas?
I mean, mine's simple, just being able to support entrepreneurs to understand their business and their sector so that they can become sustainable and be able to create jobs.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I guess looking outside from a private sector perspective, looking at probably government, are there any specific policy recommendations or government policy you believe can enable growth in the creative industries, say, for instance, in Nigeria?
That's a really, really good question. I don't think we're there yet. You know, they call it creating an enabling environment.
Yes.
Okay, so the best thing is the basic enabling environment. So making it quicker and easier to be able to register a business. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all it is. I mean, the only other one is export. So right now, a lot of the creative industries don't have codes. So if you wanted to send a piece of furniture to another country, you actually have to have, like, I can't remember what they call it, but you have to have a code. So there needs to be a systemization in terms of identifying all the different creative products. So if that's done, then that means that you as a hat maker will be able to sell your products into Europe because you can say, right, it's an identifiable code. I'm not an expert in this area, but the point is, one of the things that falls apart in terms of Africa getting its goods outside of the continent is the fact that is regulation. Yeah. This is probably stuff that you know better than I do. But then the truth of the matter is that Europe's trade agreement with Africa is wholly unfair. And it kind of like stops us from being able to export our goods and services. So having the AU and the EU coming together and actually having a much equitable and more equal trade agreement would be incredible. We need to get the whole continent of Africa to be able to drop its trade borders at the end of the day. Okay, in order to accelerate growth, you should be able to just move around freely. Goods and services is what I mean. So customs is a massive area in which we need to regulate it, but we also need to almost deregulate it so that we can have more freedom of movement. The thing that I said earlier before is education. And I think that the government needs to put aside quite a substantial amount of its budget in terms of providing business development support, so that businesses actually understand their sector and understand business. When I do the business training, I find that all of the entrepreneurs that I've been supporting have been working off of their intuition, all right? And that means that they will take 3.5 years to do something they could do in I'm not even going to kid you, like say 2 weeks. Yeah, because they're stumbling around in the dark. So if we could actually have structured business development support within 3 weeks, I find that I can hammer out someone's business model quite quickly. Doesn't take that long. It just takes experts that are really focused to be able to support people to do that. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Instead of like dragging it out for 3.5 years, sometimes a decade, and people will then all of them go, oh my God, that's what my business is about, you know?
Yes,
and,
yes.
you know, then 12 minutes with me, it's like, boom, that's what my business is about. And then they can carry on with the work of actually doing their business. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, I guess in summary, it would be being able to move goods and services more freely across the continent, better trade negotiation. And these are all things that everyone knows, but trade negotiations with key markets like Europe and America, international, you know, and now UK. And yeah, training, capacity building, so important, so important, because the creatives themselves are the innovators of their own sector, and they're just being shackled by not being able to move their goods and services around and be able to work with each other more freely.
Brilliant. So you touched on an important point, which is creating an enabling environment that can help stimulate income and build businesses. So from the work, or specifically from the work that you've done, can you share any examples of how the creative or cultural industries in Africa have positively impacted a community?
Oh my goodness. Well, we could start with my festival. So I'm part of a festival called Asabako,
Yes.
which was set up in 2011 for that main reason. So in 2007, I was commissioned to do some research by the British Council on the power of festivals to regenerate rural communities. Yeah. So I wrote the report. I was very excited, and I was like, come on, British Council, you know, why don't we test it? And it just didn't happen. And this kind of report just sat on a shelf. And I think that was my first experience of the truth of government, where they write all these reports, but they don't have either the money or the inclination to actually deliver on the recommendations.
Yes.
And at that time, there was a bunch of us, Kofi, Rich, and Rita, and we all basically had the same desire, and loads of other people had the same desire. And so we kind of like rolled up our sleeves and set about putting together the blueprint and actually actualizing this festival. And it's now in its 12th year. It's hosted on in Busia, which is on the western coast of Ghana. And the festival brings in $200,000 in tourism spend over a 3-day period into this local fishing village. We've seen this village transform itself from being very rural to now being a thriving beach resort community. And when I mean thriving, I mean it's literally the place that people want to go from wherever in the world. You've got people coming in from Colombia, Germany, Canada, you know, you name Ireland, England, everywhere in the world. We've got people that come specifically for the festival, obviously, but actually the whole place is alive throughout the year. Yes, of course, there's loads of down seasons that's, you know, still building, but it's a far cry from where it was before. The two things that I thought was really incredible was that when we held the festival in 2013, when they had the Ebola scare, and what you saw, I can't think of the percentages, but I'm going to say 60% of tourism dropped in Africa between 2013 and 2014. Our festival was one of the only things that people went to. So the brand and the belief in it was able to survive like one of the most hysterical pandemics. And then we also survived the second pandemic, which we were all aware of. And we were able to hold the festival. We didn't hold it in 2021 just because we were all in lockdown, but we held it in 2022 and in 2023, and our numbers actually increased in 2023. So that is the power of the creative industries.
Amazing, you know? Amazing. So the festival has been going since 2011. So
yes.
What do you believe has made the festival sustainable and, I guess,
a plan?
A plan. It's quite simple.
A structure, you know what I mean? You know, I'm an events manager by trade and I'm a business developer. You know, you're not going to get more sort of like organized and process driven than that. what's the saying? If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail.
Exactly.
And it took a long time for us to get the blueprint right. It took 5 years. And now that the blueprint is there, we can just roll out the festival. And now we can add to it because we've got the infrastructure and everyone knows exactly how the festival works. And once you've got those foundations set, then you can start to innovate,
Fantastic.
And that's how we're able to be sustainable, by having good communication, very, very structured approach to how we deliver, incredibly regimented, or almost to the point where it's military. Yeah.
Brilliant. Sometimes it has to be like that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm really proud. We're considered one of the safest festivals in the world for women. And so that doesn't happen without thought and planning, and a lot of work. We work very closely with the local police, all the local community, all the elders, the chiefs, everything, to be able to create a really safe and enjoyable festival.
Amazing. I think you kind of answered my question in terms of, do you believe this model can be transferred to other parts of Africa? I guess if so, do you have plans of taking the festival or taking that model to other parts of Africa?
No, because my focus is the business, Hatch Ideas. Asabako is a festival that we are producing because we're creatives ourselves. So it's kind of like our creative story or, opportunity. So no, but we do say Asabako gatherings in other parts. They're nothing like the festival. The festival is the mothership, but we do have gatherings and get-togethers in Berlin and in London, and we're looking to partner with people in Amsterdam and other parts of the world in order to kind of give them a little bit of the Asabako experience. But no, we don't. What we did on purpose was we wanted to show people that it could be done. And what we've seen is loads of festivals rise and fall while they're figuring out, now they can see that this is something that is very valuable and doable. So they're figuring it out themselves, which is great. Interestingly enough, the British Council themselves recognized this, and they started this festival development program. I believe it was just for West Africa. I also did some research for them about mapping the festival landscape across Nigeria. Because look, at the end of the day, the whole continent of Africa is the continent of festivals. Yeah.
Yes.
So, that's why I'm answering the question in this way. It's not for us. I don't have that colonialist mindset. Do you know what I mean? You lend your expertise, you shine a light on things, but people take up the mantle themselves. It's for them to do in their community. Do you see what I mean? And if we're invited to share our expertise, absolutely, yes. But I'm not going to go trampling around the continent. I find it very problematic, that kind of way of thinking, and also when you are doing community-centered work, it's going to be very particular to that space.
Yes.
I think it loses its special something, or it changes. Maybe it doesn't lose. It becomes something else when you take it somewhere else. The festival is a combination of the producers, the community, the sand, the sun, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess as someone who consistently advises others in the creative industry, and you've also taken your destiny into your own hands in terms of the work that you're doing, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs in the creative and cultural industries in Africa?
This is what I repeat to everybody. Get advice, get actual business training. And no, you don't have to go and get an MBA or anything like that. You can go online and see if you can find any free courses. Obviously, get in touch. We do some ad hoc briefings now and again. We also get government funding in order to deliver projects. But absolutely get foundational business development knowledge and skills and know-how under your belt. Get a mentor, just someone who you can check in with and can help you to ask you open questions, just to help you to stretch what you're thinking. Sometimes, not even sometimes, a lot of creatives work in isolation. And so they don't really have people to bounce their ideas off of. So they're not giving you the answers, but what they're doing is they're just helping you to think differently, maybe about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then lastly, and most importantly, your creativity is about yourself, and so it is to do with your purpose. So stand behind your creativity. When I first started, I had, it was really sad, actually. I was recognized by some people as being brilliant, but then there was a whole bunch of people that just thought what I was doing was absurd. And I was invited to the House of Commons as a young entrepreneur to do some networking. And my mentor who took me there, he actually stood there in front of, I was in a room full of like, I would say 60 white men. And he stood there and he actually said to everyone, "This is my mentee. She thinks that she's going to make a career out of promoting African culture." Do you know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
I know. And you know what? It was really hard for me to stand behind my belief, but I'm really happy that I did. So I would say, even if people don't get it, if people think that what you're doing is far-fetched, if you really passionately believe in it and it makes you happy, then stand behind your purpose, all right? So I guess stand behind your purpose, get some really good foundational early stage business know-how under your belt, and then just try and find someone you respect, a friend or an elder who you can have as a mentor, and you can have them to help you bounce ideas from.
Amazing advice. Thank you for that, Yemisi. So you've given some great advice for aspiring entrepreneurs in terms of those who are looking to enter the market and progress. So if we look at, I guess, progression and what we're seeing in Africa's creative industries at the moment, are there any specific trends in Africa's creative industry that you're currently seeing that you're excited about?
The trend that I'm seeing that I'm excited about is definitely film and TV, you know?
Yes.
I think we've gotten our head around music and we've gotten our head around fashion. But what we need to do is we need to dominate the film space and the TV space in terms of training. You know, we haven't even started to start training people. But I feel that a lot of young people, that was interrupted by COVID, but a lot of people have been going and getting training, you know, as production handlers, just what I mean, all the backstage stuff. And it's like we're so close in terms of just having our own solid, without apology, just their film industries, yeah? Pushing out content for everyone to enjoy, but absolutely from an African point of view.
Amazing, amazing. So you're currently excited about, I guess, the positive progress that we're seeing in the African film and TV space, although there is still a long way to go. We have made a lot of progress from the early days of Nollywood to where we currently are, where you're seeing Nollywood films on Netflix and Amazon.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, you know, I'm not here to talk about the quality because I think the quality of all of it has always been excellent. Yes. I think people have been grading the quality based on someone else's mindset. I'm happy to watch a 4-hour Nollywood film. Everyone is. So that to me means it's good. if you're, do you know what I mean? So, you know, all these people that are like, oh my God, yeah, well, you watched the whole thing, didn't you? I didn't see you leaving. So, you know, for me, it's great. What I'm talking more about is the determination and confidence in terms of being able to actually create our own content from our own point of view. Yes. The hustle is real. People aren't taking no for an answer, and they're not modifying or changing their plans to suit other industries.
So with that in mind, where do you see Africa's creative and cultural industries in 5 years' time?
Oh, the dominant, one of the principal ones, standing on its own, people buying and selling. A conversation like this would be unimaginable
in 5
to have.
Years. I hope so.
Oh, it will be because, you know, look at all the jumps that we've made. We're on the acceleration curve. If we can just get, even if this is my dream, to be able to transform people into micro investors, because that's how a lot of these creative projects happen, is that they are invested in. Yeah. Yes. They don't just happen through sweat. So if we can come together and create these like investment pots and actually have some really structured training programs and investment, we're going to see fashion manufacturing, we're going to see, you know, record studios, we're going to see, you know, our equivalent of music training and film production, everything, even online metaverse type,
Yes.
online shops and, everything, because, we're there's no end to our capabilities and imagination. But the truth is that we had to, first of all, give ourselves permission.
Yes.
And now we've done that. Now it's kind of like if someone says to an African person, oh, change what you're doing, make it less African, we can just roll our eyes and go, whatever. And that took a while to happen, We have to be honest about that. And now that's happened, we now have to get to a place where we blindly, and I say blindly, invest in each other. So we're putting each other first. So if, for instance, someone wants to build a studio, we're hungry to invest in them. Do you know what I mean?
Brilliant. If we look closer to home, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? What will Yemisi be doing?
Oh my goodness. I might be on my yacht. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's easy. I love water. I think it's because I was born in Lagos and I've always, lived near water. But anyway, I definitely, I'm getting on in my years and I just want to chill. So I think the strong knowledge that I've got a functioning business development agency that's supporting hundreds of people to realize their business dreams and being able to be there to support investment into the creative industries, and most importantly, being able to take strolls on the beach and just have a lot more time to smile and look up at the sky and and relax and feel the sun on my face. It's very poetic.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Yes, it's the one I always use. And I don't even know if it's an African proverb, but there's a saying like, which is true. If you want to go fast, go alone. And that's fine, But if you want to go far, go together. Brilliant. And I really want anyone that believes in and values the African self to start to come together so that we can go further and we can go far. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And I guess it's in keeping with one of the key themes of today's conversation about building that infrastructure and that ecosystem so that the whole industry can thrive. So in order to do that, you have to go together.
100%.
100%. So we've come into the close of today's conversation. I was wondering if you have any closing remarks, any final calls to action for people who are interested in the work that you're doing?
Oh, yes. If you're interested. So I'm the company's Hatch Ideas. We're across all the socials as Ideas Hatch. On Instagram is ideas.hatch. We also have Hatch Africa. And so, just get onto the socials, get in touch with us, follow us. There's always going to be someone that will pick up a message or call. We support people who've just got an idea and maybe want to sound it out, and or people that are actually want to turn their side hustle into a proper business, and or people that are already well in the game but they want to actually scale and take their business to the next level. So get in touch with us. We're always here, and there's always useful information on our websites and our YouTube channels and across the socials.
Fantastic. Thank you, Yemisi, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and insights with us today. It has been an incredibly enlightening and educational discussion. So once again, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and we will speak soon.
Superb. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.